Hi everyone, and welcome back to No Waffle GCSE. This is a No Waffle A-level series about AQA A-level politics, covering Chapter 1 of the specification, and this is a Part 1 video. Our lesson outline is as follows. We'll be looking at rules and rights, what a constitution is and how to evaluate it. Followed by that, we'll be analysing the British Constitution in particular, its main sources, and some pre-1997 key events that have helped influence its formation. Rules and rights. Individual rights are rights as guaranteed by the Constitution. For example, freedom of speech. Collective rights are rights as lying with groups of people. For example, the right for trade unions to go on strike. The rule of law is a principle that the law applies to everyone, even those who govern. And how effective this is in reality versus theory can be debated. A constitution. A constitution is a body of fundamental principles or established precedents according to which a state or other organisation is acknowledged to be governed. Put simply, it's a collection of ideas that a country or a nation agrees to be governed by, and this varies depending on what part of the world you're in geographically. For example, a Western liberal democracy, which is a democracy of most of Europe, the United States, Canada, Australia, etc., try to uphold very similar ideas, and this is agreed by the majority of the population as well. How to evaluate a constitution. Guarantee of free democratic elections is important in preventing a dictatorship. A balance of rights is important when you look at the differences between individual and collective rights and how they often clash. We will come to this in greater detail later on. Lays out clearly where power lies, for example, whether power is centralised, as it is in the UK, or federal, as it is more commonly in the United States. Clear conflict resolution. Obviously, countries don't want to be involved in war. It's costly to the economy. It's costly in terms of human life. So, an effective constitution will have a clear conflict resolution, which will prevent conflicts from escalating. Upholding the rule of law is really important, ensuring that everyone is subject to the consequences of breaking the law and everyone follows the law where possible. Tolerance promotion is really important, and especially tolerance of different race, ethnicities, religion, sexualities, gender, etc. This is more commonly upheld in Western liberal democracies throughout history. One example of where tolerance promotion was mentioned theoretically, i.e., written down, but not actually upheld in practice, is Article 25 of Stalin's USSR 1936 regime, which failed in the sense that it proposed religious freedom, that this was only in theory, because in reality there was intense religious persecution of all religions. So that's a really important example that you can use to evaluate or analyze tolerance promotion argument. And finally, flexibility. Whether a constitution is flexible can to link to its effectiveness can be debated. One may argue that flexibility is beneficial, which we have in the UK due to our constitution being uncodified, though others may argue that a rigid constitution is much better because it's less likely to be swayed by very minor or um, very minor ideas, very insignificant ideas that happen just as popularity and random trends happen. National identity is really important, and this is maintained throughout the reflection of the 7 other ideas that have been explored on the screen. So, let's look at the British Constitution in particular. The 4 key features of the British Constitution are that it is unitary, which means that most power is concentrated in the centre at Westminster. Though remember, we are moving towards quasi-federalism, arguably through devolution, which we will come to later on. Uncodified means that we have no single document, unlike the USA, where they have multiple copies of a list literally saying what they want their constitution to have and uphold, what rules they want to uphold. Um, Parliamentary sovereignty is a principle that Parliament's judgments are above the judgments of any other international body when legislating in Britain, in the UK. And one example of parliamentary sovereignty is throughout the Brexit negotiations, where in 2018 they repealed the European Communities Act, which had been set up since 1972 and had been adopted by Britain. And this shows parliamentary sovereignty and judgment importance over the influence of European Parliament and European courts. Finally, the rule of law we've already explored, and it just shows that the British Constitution aims to operate under this. At the bottom, we have a comment from A.B. Dicey, who wrote that the Constitution is upheld by the twin pillars, and that is the 2 bottom points: parliamentary sovereignty and rule of law. He argues that these are the most important foundations of the Constitution, and you and your essays can debate whether this is true or to what extent you agree with his argument. So, some exam style practice which we're going to do, you could probably get a question similar to this where it says explain and analyse three main sources of the British Constitution, and this would be a 9 marker. We will have a video posted about how to answer a 9 marker, so feel free to search up our channel for that if you want help. But I'll be following the point evidence explanation format for all of these. So there are actually six main sources of the Constitution listed out here below. You can read them, and the question will only ask, a 9 marker will only ask you to explain and analyze three of them. We're going to explain and analyze all of them, and then you can pick whichever ones you remember, or just to help practice your skills. So, without further ado, let's begin. So, the first one we're going to look at is statute law. So, when setting this out, the best thing to do would be to define statute law at the beginning. So, for example, statute law we know is any law that is passed by both parliamentary houses, so the House of Lords and Commons, and has received royal assent. For example, the Human Rights Act of 1998, which I've bracketed as HRA, has incorporated the ECHR, which is the European Convention of Human Rights, into UK law. And then in your analysis, you can justify how important this is. Arguably, this is the most important because it limits parliamentary sovereignty, for example. And there's a Lisbon example, which we're going to go into in more detail as well in just a second. But you can always talk about how a law has been passed by both houses, so it's received majority agreement. And in this case, it actually limited parliamentary sovereignty. So you can talk about how this impacts one of the pillars of our constitution in general as well. The Lisbon example is the Lisbon Treaty of 2007, which meant that European laws took precedence over Westminster laws at one time as well. So you can reinforce the Human Rights Act example with this. A second paragraph could be on common law. So common law is basically judicial precedents and laws that have been passed down. For example, criminality for murder has been a crime, has been an issue for centuries in the UK, even up until the Anglo-Saxon times as well. You can analyze this by saying it's often modified by statute law. For example, the abolition of the death penalty in 1965. So you're also talking about the effectiveness of statute law and therefore linking your paragraphs as well. Alternatively, you could talk about a royal prerogative. So royal prerogative are residual powers that are exercised in the name of the crown. For example, the prorogation of Parliament in 2019 August was when Boris Johnson requested the Queen to prorogue Parliament for a period longer than 5 weeks, and she agreed to this. You can analyse this by saying that the royal prerogative was limited as a Supreme Court, what SC stands for here, Supreme Court judgment of 11-0 in September 2019 voted that Boris Johnson's action of proroguing Parliament for that period was unlawful and illegal. So you could say that whilst it's a source of the Constitution, it's often limited by a different branch of government, which we'll come to in a later video. Also, we can talk about conventions. So conventions are basically unwritten rules and procedures mostly concerned with Parliament that facilitate the smooth running of the Constitution. For example, the Salisbury-Atkinson Convention of 1945, I believe, where a Tory-dominated House of Lords agreed to pass and not block any certain legislation proposed by the Labour Party. You can analyse this by saying that when conventions are broken, it leads to deadlock, but when there is unity for this, it's highly beneficial. For example, the creation of the NHS, which happened following this, as the Tory House of Lords didn't block the proposals. Your fifth paragraph could be on works of authority. So, for example, so these are works by scholars, politicians, etc., who've written political works that influence and have helped shape the Constitution. For example, the Cabinet Manual of 2010, or A.V. Dicey, the Twin Pillars gentleman, who wrote in his book Introduction to the Study of Law of the Constitution of 1885. He mentioned the argument about the Twin Pillars of democracy. You can analyse this by saying the fundamental ideas are purported and implemented. So obviously, parliamentary sovereignty and the rule of law are still upheld and still part of our constitution today. So you can talk about the influence of these written ideas and written works, even in the modern times now. Yeah. So we're going to move on to the key developments pre-1997. So Magna Carta of 1215. So I apologize for the logo covering, but it represents the first formal attempt to limit power of the government. So it was King John's men who um, wrote the Magna Carta, and there's still extras of this today, trying to limit his power. Moving on to the Bill of Rights, 1689. This is a British Bill of Rights. Please bear this in mind, not the American one. This led to the ideas of frequent parliament, free elections, no taxation without parliament agreement being mentioned by upper class men who wanted more freedom away from the monarchy. Two more developments. We have the Act of Settlement in 1701. So Parliament are actually having a role in laying out the lineage for the monarchy and transferring the line of succession to Sophia of Hanover. And then fast forward about 200 years, we have the Parliament Acts of 1911 and 1949. So this 1911 ended the absolute veto of the House of Lords and restricted the power to delay a bill for 2 years. And in 1949, this was amended to reduce the delay to 1 year instead of two. European Communities Act 1972. This is the idea that all legislation had to conform with EU law. Obviously, remember this was repealed, but it's an incursion into the hallowed doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty, which is reinforced by the Lisbon Treaty in 2007, which we've already had a look at. It's a starting point of the UK's problematic relationship with Europe, especially with the Withdrawal Act. So we can debate the extent to which parliamentary sovereignty has had its influence and significance throughout time when you compare 1972 up until 2018. So that brings us to the close of the part 1 video. Well done for getting this far. There'll be a link in the description box down below for the part 2 video. Aside from that, be sure to subscribe. We also offer tuition and an essay marking service, which can be really helpful for A-level politics. If you are interested, please feel free to either message us on Instagram at KnowWhatForLearning or contact us via our email or our YouTube comment section. Have a good day, and I hope to see you in our next video. Thank you.